I'm going to record. All
Thanks,
yours, Brad.
Ryan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. This is really for me kind of taking you through my journey. I began in manufacturing and made the transition to healthcare after a significant amount of time in manufacturing. And what I learned very quickly is what I knew didn't work. And I have a lot of colleagues in the healthcare space that are manufacturing in their initial exposure to improvement science. And so, there's varying degrees of adaptation. So I'm going to talk about some of the adaptations I had to go through, to be successful in this space. There we go. This is just in here for reference purposes. The only thing I'm going to say about this slide is, to quote Billy Gibbons, I've been up, I've been down, take my word, my way around. For those of you who don't know, Billy Gibbons was lead singer, lead guitar player for ZZ Top. So I resemble the comment. I will point out a few key points. I laid out my career in healthcare versus what was going on in the industry at the time. And I joined GE Performance Solutions, which, by the way, is where I met Deborah, and instant rapport, just such a great resource, in 1995. And in that period of time, there really wasn't a lot of what I would call Lean or Six Sigma in healthcare. I saw presentations from Virginia Mason, that had dates on them, 1996. So I know they were playing in that space about that point in time, but there wasn't a lot of that going on. The Error is Human came out in 99, and Virginia Mason's production system and ThetaCare system really wasn't codified and published until 2002, 2003. But in 97, I won what I would call my first big engagement in healthcare, which was the redesign of the emergency room at Northwestern in Chicago. And that was an extremely enlightening experience because it taught me a lot of what you're going to have to unlearn, and you're going to have to really change your thinking if you're going to be successful in this space. Northwestern, the redesign of Northwestern, their problem was they were overflowing from the day they opened. They put up 2 towers, bought 2 city blocks of Chicago, demolished it, put up 2 towers, opened up a new facility, and their emergency room was overflowing from day one. And a couple of things I learned in going through the assessment process there, their executive team was like, just tell us how many more rooms to build. And the answer to that question was 30. The decision engineering team that I worked with on the Northwestern side, what I discovered is every calculation in their mathematical models were based on averages. And process never performs at the average. But it gave me the hooks to work with the leadership team because I took every improvement that we recommended and I put it in the form of, this is the equivalent of building this many rooms. So it was a great way of engaging them and getting them to move. I approached it the way my manufacturing mindset had taught me to approach it. I broke it into specific parts and I facilitated a total of 6 rapid improvement events that were supposed to be cascaded and form an integrated whole. The challenge is the integration of those component parts never really came together. In 2004, by the time I hit 2004, I was frustrated, I was burned out, I was confused, and I left improvement science and healthcare for a role in a .com. Shortly after the second .com bubble burst, or the first .com bubble rather, that was supposed to be a pump, flip, and retire proposition. Didn't quite work out that way. And in 2008, I came back to what I really love to do, which is improvement science and healthcare. And I'd like to say that changed things. I came back. I went from confused, frustrated, and burned out in 2004 to significantly clinically depressed in 2008, because there's a very different sense of meaning in your work when previously 1 in 10 patients that came into a facility with congestive heart failure readmitted within 10 days, and now it's 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000. And a customer service call used to cost us $5. Now it costs us 83 cents. Different kind of feel good there. So I was very happy to be back. But a lot of my colleagues were ex-manufacturing like myself and still had that manufacturing mindset. So I'm going to talk about the difference between those two mindsets. Another big one, 2012, Healthcare Performance Partners was acquired by MedAssets. And that's where I met Dr. Marty Lucini. Marty Lucini is an emergency room doctor and a PhD industrial engineer. And it just so happened we met at a leadership meeting when the companies were being integrated. And he walked up to me and he said, "You're Brad Schultz." I said, "Guilty." He said, "The same Brad Schultz that redesigned the emergency room at Northwestern." I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "I'm Marty Lucini. I'm a PhD industrial engineer and an emergency room doctor. And I joined 3 months after you left and I inherited your design." He joined Northwestern as their medical director. I inherited their design. The two of us became fast friends. And over the next 3 years, we redesigned 35 emergency rooms across the country together. Most of those that followed the program, not everybody follows the program, but most of those that followed the program became weight-free. And I'm not talking about emergency rooms that have 6,000 a year in patient volume. I'm talking 80,000 and up. Biggest one was 120,000 in volume. In 2016, MedAssets was acquired by Vizient. When the pandemic hit, consulting work dried up for us, but Marty and I stood up 12 alternative care facilities during the pandemic across the country, going from nothing to fully functional supply chain in 2 weeks and fully functional facility in a month, using the same tools and techniques I'm going to talk about today. In 2023, I retired from Vizient. I still consult independently about 1/3 of my time. I spend 1/3 of my time as a volunteer for the Senior Corps of Retired Executives, coaching young entrepreneurs in the development of their business. And I spend about 1/3 of my time traveling and hanging out with my grandkids. So I give you a pretty good sense of my background. So this is the world I came from. I started my career as a manufacturing engineer in GE Healthcare's magnetic resonance imaging business. And that's an ordered systems environment. And if you look at the graphical representation, this is how things kind of go. You take raw materials and you perform operations on them, and as a result, they're more valuable. So this is an environment that's highly predictable. Not very much subject to outside influences. The relationships and the connections between processes are highly explicit. It's easy to see patterns, and the relationships are relatively linear. Easy to pick up cause and effect. And I went from this to this. I learned very quickly, healthcare is not an ordered systems environment. It's highly complex. It's highly adaptive. Think of the patient as being at the center of this image. And a key thing here in complex adaptive systems, and specifically as it relates to healthcare, value is not created the same way it was created when I was in manufacturing. We take raw materials, we perform operations on them, and as a result, they're more valuable. And anything that isn't one of those operations was non-value add because it wasn't increasing the value of what came as an output. Healthcare, we deliver patient-centered care that improves health outcomes and enhances patient well-being. That's a different way of value creation altogether. And it's delivered in a system that's highly complex, highly adaptive. So cause and effect relationships are not really straightforward. The teams delivering the care, not only can they adapt, they must adapt. So you actually see process emerge as opposed to being defined and going step. Extremely complex, chaotic, and extremely impacted by external factors. So a lot of times the feedback loops are multiple, dynamic, and invisible. So the first thing I learned, and I learned this very, very quickly, every problem I encountered had an immediate solution that was wrong when I put my manufacturing engineering mindset to it. Kind of like my high school algebra test here, you know. I had to if values created differently, I had to rethink my concept of value add, which means I had to rethink that downtime acronym that everybody's so enamored with. And I've had this dialogue with my manufacturing colleagues, I don't know how many times, but you know, we both step out into the street and you get hit by a car and you're in serious, serious trauma. That ride in the ambulance to the hospital, value add or non-value add? You order food from Grubhub, you're paying for delivery. Definitely value add, definitely value add. So that transporting in the downtime acronym, and there's others. You really got to rethink that in a complex adaptive systems world. I had to rethink direct process observation because what I realized is what I was seeing, it wasn't so much about what I was seeing. I could make good use of what I was seeing. It was what I wasn't seeing and had to learn to go see that was critical in many cases. Had to rethink statistical methods. If I did a regression equation or a designed experiment in a manufacturing context and I got an R-squared of less than 85%, I didn't believe the model. There's something missing. I'm not there. If I get an R-squared of 50% in a healthcare setting, I'm jumping for joy. And I encountered a lot of what I call solutions masquerading as problems. Try to facilitate an A3 or you're having a breakout discussion associated with a rapid improvement event, and it's like, yeah, the scheduling process is all jacked up. That's not a problem. That's a solution masquerading as a problem. You believe that if you fix the schedule, you're going to get some results. Something is going to have to get better. And I had to put into practice probing much deeper than those surface responses that I got, you know, as I started doing this work. You know, when I went into that confusion state, I kind of took some comfort and some inspiration from Einstein. You know, Einstein said the problems of today will not be solved by the level of thinking that created them. Well, that changed the way I facilitated rapid improvement events. I used to facilitate rapid improvement events using the participants as the subject matter expert team and me being the individual that took them through the process that unleashed their creativity and their innovation and got to a more improved state. But what I learned is in aggregate, their understanding of complex adaptive systems is not deep. They feel it. They have a sense of it because they live in it every day, but really not deep enough. So I began coming into all my rapid improvement events with a well-designed, well-thought-out construct. Now, if you think about that, kind of defies the laws of facilitation, but not terribly. Because what you're bringing when you come in with a construct is a mechanism. And the context plus the mechanism equals the effectiveness of the solution set. So the facilitation was more so to adapt the mechanism to the organizational context, as opposed to trying to innovate in that session itself. Another Einstein quote that very heavily influenced my thinking as I started to make this transition out of the ordered systems world to the complex adaptive systems world. Intellectuals solve problems, geniuses prevent them. And, I really had to learn to think through, if I was going to do a rapid improvement event or something like that, all of the unintended consequences. Because you go into this with a pretty well-defined set of intended consequences. But if I fix something here in a complex adaptive system, it's extremely probable that I will break something somewhere else. And if what I'm doing is not working on the related components of the system, I'm only doing half the game. These are some learnings that came a little more slowly to me. Man, the linear systems environment is all about predictability. And there's areas within healthcare where, first off, the relationships are nonlinear, and next off, they're never going to be fully predictable. Cycle time and takt time. I used to have a lot of discussions with my manufacturing colleagues on that. If you provide a patient in an emergency room setting a therapeutic, what's the takt time for evaluation of whether that therapeutic is working or not? It's something to really rethink. If you're dealing with a process that looks more like an ordered systems process, lab, radiology, I think it's an appropriate metric, but if you try to apply it in certain places, it's going to lead you to the wrong place. Problem solving in Kaizen. Ask why 5 times. It's a nice tool when applied appropriately, but most challenges are really systems issues. They're not process issues. They're system issues, and they don't have a single root cause. 5 whys it was designed to take you down to a single root cause that you could focus on. But the process is also, because it plays out in a complex adaptive system, subject to ripple effects that go through the entire system and then trigger those feedback loops. And the system adapts to it and changes. So you really have to rethink that. Also, I had to rethink key performance indicators. That came to me very early, when I was doing the ED engagement at Northwestern. I was looking through the data and I'm like, how come all the patients who come here in the afternoon are seen at 11 o'clock at night? I don't get it. Well, the doctors were signing up for them at 11 o'clock, and that's the proxy that was being used from the data. So you had to rely more on direct process observation in that case. But when I was in the manufacturing space, I had 4 key performance indicators. That was it. Did we ship complete and on time? Were we linear? In other words, did all the units come out evenly spaced as opposed to every unit coming out on Friday? What were our month 0 warranty costs, which was a proxy for quality and for patient or customer satisfaction? And what was our productivity? you have substantially more metrics in the healthcare space because you have so many aspects you have to consider. And something that's really important in making those considerations, I drew kind of value diamond up here. This became ingrained in my thinking over time. In manufacturing, optimal is mathematical. If I'm calculating the optimal feeds and speeds of a cutting tool through material, it's the intersection of two curves. I get productivity if I move faster and quicker, but I get increased tool wear that eventually overruns the cost of or the value of my productivity. So in an ordered systems environment, optimal is usually a mathematical construct. In healthcare, it's contextual. You know, it's not a mathematical construct, it's contextual. So building on an emergency room example, take a look at what's the optimal triage process. So an important distinction to understand in answering that question first is triage answers the wrong question. It answers the question, who can wait? The right question is, how can we have enough? So if we have an open treatment space, we don't triage. The optimal triage process is no triage. When we start getting constrained, the optimal triage process is single stage for routing purposes. And as that constraint intensifies, the optimal process becomes dual stage for routing and risk stratification. Other thing that became ingrained to me is that continuous incremental improvement has its place. I'm not bashing it, it has its place, but tinkering with a system piecemeal rarely delivers sustainable and meaningful results. It often leads to trade-offs. And what I mean by trade-offs, if you go to the value diamond, most of the trade-offs that I've seen are time and money. We improve time, we improve money, but the quality, safety, reliability isn't there, and the patient satisfaction isn't there. So in that case, we really didn't improve anything. We get focused on our improvement metric and we see it get better and we go, oh, we made an improvement here. But the true test is, did all 4 points get better simultaneously? And if all 4 points did not get better simultaneously, we didn't improve anything, we traded. We traded off. So if you think about the implications of that in a complex adaptive system, success occurs when continuous improvement activity becomes transformative. It has to really become transformative if we're going to improve all 4 points of value diamond simultaneously. So some of the prerequisites of success that I kind of learned through going through this journey is you really have to understand it. Even if you're working on a simple process, you need to understand it within the relationship of its place within the system and its context within the system, because they interact and they morph and they learn and they adapt. So you have to understand what those relationships are before you get too far out over your skis designing. And if you fail to do that, you're probably going to end up with a trade-off. It's very likely you're going to end up with a trade-off. The other thing to keep in mind is if you're not improving a constraining variable for the system, you're going to get limited results. And if you are improving a constraining variable for the system, you're going to be bound by the next constraining variable. Very simply, if you're going to treat patients in an emergency room, you need a treatment space, you need doctors, and you need nurses. If I have nurses that can manage 12 patients an hour doctors that can manage 8 patients an hour and enough treatment space for 10 patients an hour. And I say, ooh, I don't have enough doctors. So I take that up to where the nurses are. I'm not going to go from 8 to 12. I'm going to go from 8 to 10 because I'm bound by my next constraining variable. And it's important to understand those relationships when you start projecting what you think you can get for an improvement effort. Another key challenge, I mean, even in the manufacturing environment, we knew the reliability of a system is a multiplicative of its subcomponents. That's what rolled throughput yield is all about. But think of trying to measure rolled throughput yield in a context that's continually adapting. So it's just something to keep in mind, the highly interdependent nature of a complex system. Because when you tweak something somewhere, it's going to have significant effects other places in the system. So I'll walk you through kind of a example of this in action. So think about a regional medical center, overcrowded ED, significant inpatient bed boarding, excessive wait times, high left without being seen, left without treatment. I know none of you ever encountered this, but I think I'll use it as an illustration anyhow. This is probably one of the most common problems in healthcare. And remember when I was talking about my past and my first big engagement being the redesign of Northwestern and how I approached that. I really approached that with that linear mindset. Assessed it, found what I thought were the key contributing factors to their issues, facilitated 6 rapid improvement events that were intent to be an integrated whole, but never really manifested as an integrated whole. So contrast that to this approach, which I believe is more appropriate for a complex adaptive system. So this is a standard configuration of most emergency rooms that I've walked into. You have an ED care space, which may or may not be partitioned. If it is partitioned, it may be partitioned by acuity, maybe by status. You have resources that are scheduled in there. Those resources are sometimes the algorithms that are used to determine the amount of resources, sometimes based on census, sometimes based on beds, sometimes based on flow. And triage registration serves as kind of a buffer between that treatment space and the waiting room. And when things are not working, when we can't adequately sync our capacity to our demand, things back up into the waiting room. That's the state of most emergency rooms out there. So an important thing to understand is an emergency room is a queuing system. So if you look at the graph here, the green line is patient arrivals per hour. The gray line is placements per hour, gold line, MD assessments per hour, and blue line discharges per hour. So if you look at what's going on in this ED, by 8 o'clock, capacity no longer keeps up with demand. And it stays that way for about 12 hours of the day, where it begins to catch up, but we don't really truly catch up till about midnight. So let's think about what happens here in an organization like that, where we're upside down for 12 hours of the day, and it takes us an additional 4 hours to catch up. If we get 5 additional patients in the course of a day and it takes 4 hours to treat a patient, we inflect 20 hours of work into the ED. But we inflect 80 hours of wait into the queue, because the queues degrade exponentially as weight increases some of the things I've seen, when people get to this point here, when organizations get to this point here, we start running our ESI level 3s through fast track. And they don't understand what they're doing by doing that. But if I talk to them about, hey, you went to the grocery store, you just happened to get there when it was absolutely crowded, and they shut down to 10 items or less lanes, would things get better or worse? And that's an understandable analogy in that space. So given what I just described about queuing systems and the behavior of queuing systems, what's wrong with this picture here? The bars are patient arrivals. The lines are 4 different staffing models, with and without APPs, and at 2 different productivity rates. But so don't worry about the height of the curve, worry about the shape of the curve. And what's wrong with this picture? So what's wrong with this picture is look when patient volume peaks and where staffing peaks in response to it. That's 3 hours. That's about 16 hours of additional weight you just inflected into the system. So your staffing model really needs to stay ahead of the curve. Another thing that I've seen in terms of organizations attempting to react to the significant weight is to move a provider out into triage. And there's some advantage to that, in that you're creating kind of in process within the ED. So you're starting right away. But in the long run, this is not a very patient satisfying approach. It does get you better door-to-dock metrics, but if you want a really outstanding door-to-dock metric, have your docs valet park the patient cars and you'll get a negative number. So imagine you're doing that approach that I talked about, the 6 rapid improvement events cascaded. And one of those improvement events focuses on bed boarding in the emergency department. Okay. And you facilitate a cause and effect diagram, and it looks like this. Is this something you think you're going to continuous incremental improve your way out of? Very, very, very challenging. And the reason why it's challenging is that previous slide that I showed you, bed boarding in the ED, is not an ED problem. That was one of the things I had to learn, with my manufacturing mind, to change my manufacturing mindset. When I was dealing with one of those blue boxes in that ordered systems environment, other than a lack of upstream quality, normally what happened in that box was the result of what happened in that box. External factors were not highly influential in any given box. But if you think about it, inpatient margins are relatively thin. If we owned a restaurant, full with a waiting line is a desirable place to be, provided we don't have excessive balking. And where would the safest place to wait be if a patient has to wait to get into an inpatient space? So the number 1 predictor of a full ED is actually a full hospital. So if you think about it, it's not about the ED, it's about the system operating under continuous pressure, responding to demands that are pushing the system to its limits. And really, if you consider that carefully, and you're going to come with a solution to this problem, you almost have to approach this from a point of view of disaster preparedness. My colleague Marty calls it Baghdad medicine. He's a colonel in the United States Army Reserve, and he's been on 5 deployments where if you think about that, I don't know if I'm going to have 0 patients today or 200. And I've got to build flexibility for that. Let's talk about building that flexibility. If we're going to achieve a state of high reliability, again, recall from the previous slides, it's at best the multiplicative of the reliability of the subcomponents of the system. And because the activity is highly interdependent, we really need to understand those relationships there. So there's 2 approaches you can take to building high reliability. You know, on the right-hand side, we can build reliability into every component of the system. So we ensure that each component is robust, it's dependable, it's highly reliable, it rarely fails. The advantage is that'll give you much greater predictability. There's usually greater simplicity than the alternative approach I'll describe in a minute, and it's usually more efficient. The challenge is building high reliability in every component of the system is very costly. There's a tremendous amount of complexity, and it actually limits as we get tighter and tighter and tighter in each of these subcomponents. Bear in mind, the system wants to self-correct, self-adapt. It limits adaptability. Another way of getting high reliability into a system is creating systemic resilience, where the system is designed to absorb and recover from component failures. So you can think of like redundant systems is one means of accomplishing that. But this also can be done in other ways besides redundant systems. But what you're doing is you're creating a reliability safety net in this approach. The advantage of this approach, it creates a lot of fault tolerance. It's more cost efficient than building high reliability into every component, and it allows you to scale quickly. The disadvantage is each time you have to do an adaptation within your safety net, things get more and more and more complex. It becomes resource intensive, and in the long run, it's inefficient. So neither of these represents a perfect fit for any enterprise. You know, the perfect fit is actually a combination of these. We're gonna build systemic resilience. At the same time, we're gonna build reliability into the component parts of the system. So in terms of methodology, instead of, if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't have done 6 cascaded Kaizen events and try to mesh the components together. I would have taken a transformation A, transformation B approach. In transformation A, I'm creating that systemic systemic resilience, if you will. You know, the focus is on putting that safety net in place, making small ongoing improvements that fix everyday problems, reduce bottlenecks, reduce wait time, reduce weight on the existing system. And that's really targeted at building that safety net and buying time for a more comprehensive design. Now, that more comprehensive design and that transformation B approach is going to be significantly disruptive, major shifts. It may involve completely redesigning some components or even how the way the business operates. So it's absolutely critical that be synchronized with the organization's strategic planning process and with the organization's budgeting process. Because when I facilitated those 6 independent rapid improvement events that I was hoping to stitch together, some parts of that were like, yep, nice, great idea, not in the budget. So this way, we build that safety net, and then we get the major changes more integrated. And that's kind of what this process looks like. You know, you do your assessment work and you go into a transformation A process, which is really about rapid deployment and building of that safety net. Those other things that you've discovered in that assessment process that are bigger, more disruptive, and more associated with creating independent reliability in the component parts, get integrated with budget and strategy and go into that transformation B process. And this work, it's shown here, but it really begins right after assessment, putting the nested monitoring systems in place so that you don't ever have to assess again. The management system directs you to where you need to go. And when you follow this through, this looks like this happens at the very end of the chain, but you see this double line here. This has to happen from the very beginning. You got to get leadership aligned. And some things that I've found a lot of healthcare leaders don't have a depth of understanding when it comes to is system design, errors of omission and errors of commission. You know, those are 2 fundamental concepts of a high reliability system. So think about this for a minute. If I have 5 nurses doing the work of 10, are they going to commit errors of omission or errors of commission? They're really going to commit errors of omission more frequently than anything else. I should have done this, but I just couldn't get to it. And if I have 5 nurses doing the work of 10 in an area, that is not a process issue. Those errors of omission are not a process issue. And you can work on the process till the cows come home. If I have 5 nurses doing the work of 10, I'm not going anywhere with that. So I really have to rethink staffing for productivity versus staffing for reliability. Now, at the same time, we can't build the church for Easter Sunday, so to speak. You've got to help them understand, you know, queuing systems and operational dynamics, and the fact that this isn't a linear system, it's stochastic. Not highly predictable, dynamic, constantly adapting to what's happening within it, and it's not ordered, you know. So this is how you apply transformation A to create the safety net. So in your ED care space, you're actually using your ED more as an acute diagnostic center and less as the traditional ED that most people think of. And, you know, this is kind of forced on you from the market in the first place. If you take a look at your ED volume and your ED volume is highest on Sunday, your market sees you as an ED. Because Sunday, people have nowhere else to go. So they're going to come here. If your highest volume day is Monday, they're being directed there. They're being directed there from their primary care, which means you're seen in the marketplace more as an advanced diagnostic center. We're going to create what I call in-process space. Once a patient no longer needs, now bear in mind what we're doing is we're creating the safety net on an existing system. Once a patient no longer needs the resources of the treatment room, we're going to move them out of there. We're not going to put them back in a waiting room. We're going to move them into an in-process location. So think of those patients that are just waiting a diagnostic or the impact of a therapeutic and then can leave. We've actually refurbished spaces that were previously used for storage. And you're going to segment your inpatient holds from this population here so that you can keep this space here focused on advanced diagnostics. You're going to staff it with ER resources, but this inpatient hold area, we're going to staff it with inpatient RNs. And the reason for that is if you're bedboarding a patient, let's say you bedboard a patient for 4 hours, do you shorten their length of stay by the 4 hours they were bedboarded? You actually don't, because their full plan of care isn't really being implemented, and you're adding about 4 hours to their length of stay. You can also extend this to become a hybrid OBS unit and have some patients discharged directly from here and never make it into the inpatient space. So it's really creating a hybrid acute outpatient unit, if you will, in this space. If you do this, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about think through the ramifications. The 2 charts that I'm showing here came from an organization that we didn't work with, but we went out and visited them. And we talked them through a number of things they could be doing, and they adapted quite a few of them. And they put in place just about everything we coached them to do, with the exception of anything that involved physical space. We went out, did a walkthrough, had a meeting with leadership, gave them a bunch of ideas, but told them, you know, you're probably not in a place to contract with us until you can put up 30 treatment spaces co-located with the ED. But they went through and implemented a bunch of these things, and look what happened in arrival to room time. This is the point where they implemented those things. So you see a shift here that kind of holds, but then it starts to unravel a little bit. They regroup and kind of get their arms back around it. But that's not the important point. What happened to volume? What happened to volume shortly after this? Volume starts going up. Why? There was pent-up demand here. So you really can't design for what's there today. You have to think through the longer-term ramifications and design for that when you're in a complex adaptive system, because this is an external factor, right? So let's talk about moving from a safety net to a systems approach now. So we're coming out of the world of Transformation A. What I did was I talked you through Transformation A using an ED example. Using that same example, we're going to kind of walk you through Transformation B now. And like I said before, the #1 predictor of an overflowing ED is an overflowing inpatient space, overflowing hospital. So this is kind of the standard configuration you find most hospitals in. You've got an inpatient care space that's partitioned, usually like this. You've got nurses and doctors taking care of the patients here. And kind of like the standard configuration of the emergency room that I talked you through, when you have waiting, it backs up into the ED. It backs up into the OR, the PACU. Backing up into the OR and PACU can be significant in that now you're shutting down the financial engine of the enterprise. You know, you're putting a tremendous amount of strain on the financial aspect of the enterprise. So I've seen a lot of organizations implement, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Stony Brook model. It got quite a bit of publication. What they did is they basically said, hey, if a patient can wait in a hall bed in the ED, they can wait in a hall bed on an inpatient unit. And when the decision was made, we're going to do an admission here, boom, they were sent up. They went up to the respective unit that they were going to go to. So if you look at that on the plus side, it reduced the congestion in the ED. It improved the patient flow in the ED. It provided faster access to their definitive care, enhanced ED efficiency. It actually enhanced patient satisfaction. But it put a huge strain on inpatient resources, because the big mistake that Stony Brook made was when they implemented this model, they were staffing to beds. And you got to staff to census if you're going to take this route. Some of those patients moved prematurely, which they would have been safer staying in the ED. You've got, you know, you're taking the overcrowding in the ED and you're just pushing it into overcrowding on the inpatient units. Communication gaps and delays in diagnostics, because most ED orders get done stat, you know, where these were no longer stat orders. So that's one response to that number one predictor of an overcrowded ED, overcrowded inpatient space. That's one organization's response to it. Another response that I've seen people go for heavily is we're going to lengthen stay, reduce our way into incremental capacity. And I'm here to tell you, you're not going to do it. There's no way you're going to lengthen stay, reduce your way into significant additional inpatient capacity. This is observed versus expected length of stay from 2019, just before the pandemic, to 2023. And you can see each year kind of summarized here. And during the pandemic, there was a huge focus on length of stay because people were getting hammered from a capacity perspective. We were building alternative care units to deal with that. But people were hammering on length of stay. And if you look at it, 19 to 20, it actually, versus 20 to 21, it actually got worse. Even while we're hammering on it, kind of got a little bit better 21 to 22. And 22 to 23, we actually just slightly came back down to our pre-pandemic levels. So this is not something you're going to length of stay, reduce your way into. This is the model that we recommend in Transformation B. Bear in mind, we're taking overcrowded ED. Transformation A is focusing on creating that safety net. Transformation B is focused on getting towards systemic reliability, which has to be integrated with strategy and budget. You're not going to do it without integrating it in the strategy and budget. We call this the Ibn Sina waitless inpatient model. Ibn Sina was a hospital in Baghdad that was really for Saddam Hussein and his inner circle. It was a private hospital for Saddam Hussein and his inner circle. And when we occupied Iraq, we took over that hospital and converted it to a hospital for military use. So in that setting, you didn't know whether you were going to be at 10% capacity or 300% capacity on any given day. And that's where this methodology really arose from. And what I've listed here, we implemented this model at several hospitals, but this is from the most recent hospital we implemented with. So this is some of the things we had to do in order to make this system work. But in addition to what we're doing in the ED, we're creating virtual expansion of inpatient capacity, decompressing the ED, decompressing the OR and the PACU. And I'll give a good example of this right here. But we actually had to implement semi-private rooms in some cases. Now, this is not a huge patient satisfier, but actually we found if we used it as the admissions launch pad, so to speak, where everybody stops there momentarily until they go on, it's less of an imposition and had less of an impact on satisfaction. We had to get the admission status right. In this particular enterprise, admission status was wrong 60% of the time. That transitional care unit that I showed on the ED slide didn't have weekend coverage, so you really need to build that in. My next example is going to build on this perioperative room hybrid surgical unit space and how we accomplished that. We got to a point where most observation patients discharged from the ED. They never went into an inpatient care space. So you can see, you know, the metrics had to support it. The way they huddled had to support it. And I'm going to kind of go into an example of what we did in this space here. But before I do that, this is kind of an interim to the previous model, you know, creating inpatient hold spaces with the ER and with the PACU. And I already took you through how we did that in Transformation A and the ER. But I'm going to take you through the OR PACU. And this particular facility had a unit where they did surgical patient prep and stage 2 recovery. It was a 28-bed unit. And if you look at the blue bars and the orange bars, that was where we found their current state at the time we arrived there. Blue bars are patients that are preoperative. So about 5 in the morning, we start bringing in our preoperative patients. We peak about 7 in the morning and we start sending them to the OR. You know, and that's the blue bar. And by 5 o'clock, we don't have any more of those type of patients. But at about 9 o'clock, we're pulling patients back into the unit for second stage recovery. And you see that stacked on top of the patients that are already there for prep and pre-op. So if you think about this, this is a unit that operated about 5 a.m. to midnight. Well, we found a specific patient population that was intended to be day surgery patients that ended up having a high incidence of staying overnight. And that's the magenta bars here. So you can see if you looked at this from a true capacity utilization perspective, this space, if you put it 24/7, 7 days a week, was only 17% utilized. And if you looked at it just during peak hours only, about 36% utilized. And it just so happened that this patient population in the magenta bars is juxtaposed against the current volume that's already in that space. So by moving those patients and keeping them in that space, what we did was we prevented freed up 13 surgical care unit beds that could be used for pulling in new patients now. So a couple of things, you know, that I would want you to take away from the experience. healthcare, it's complex, it's adaptive, it's nothing like an ordered systems environment. I had to throw that ordered systems mindset away. I really had to throw it away. Improvement strategies, you really have to be taking account the complexity of the system. Incremental improvements are fine if they're like highly localized, if they're in an area that behaves like an ordered system, but they're usually insufficient. And it's really transformational changes, either that transformation A, which is creating the safety net, or the transformation B approach that's going to get results. You got to balance reliability with resilience, because either one of those approaches standalone isn't going to get you there quickly. It's really the combination of both approaches that'll get you there quickly. And, improvement initiatives, I don't have to tell you this. I mean, they should really be focused on patient outcomes, the experience, and satisfaction while addressing that inherent variability. And you address that variability by either building systems that are robust enough to withstand it, that's transformation B, or creating the safety net that enables you to operate with high resilience. If you want to learn any more about this, you can get a hold of us. I put our contact information in here. This is my colleague, Marty. I've had a great time working with him. I learned more about complex adaptive systems in the first 2 years the two of us collaborated than, in the previous 20 years of consulting. So see, we got a little bit of time left. Open to Q&A.
Love it. Thank you, Brad. That was really very, very interesting. Thoughts, questions? Anyone want to ask anything?
Brad, I have a quick question. When you moved those patients to inpatient status, did the inpatient status then go into effect that you could get reimbursed for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that, that basically what we did is we created a virtual transitional care unit inside the ED space. Now, the first rendition of this was partitioned by patient status, not by location. So they're intermixed, but those inpatients are actually being served by inpatient staff, and they're in an inpatient status.
Great presentation. I learned a lot. Thank you.
This is fascinating, Bradley. I wanted to know, when you said improvement in a constraining component of a complex system will only give you improvement of the system up to the next constraining component. Did you find a way to make sure the system constraint is indeed identified?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So you stated that improvement in a constraining component of a complex system will only give improvement of the system up to the next constraining component. Did I hear you right?
Yes.
In your experience, have you found a way to pinpoint the biggest system constraint that is the top level one?
Yes. Yeah. So you can look at, in most cases, it comes down to a couple of things: facilities, staff, equipment. It's really what it comes down to.
Yes.
And facilities is real simple and straightforward, because if you look at your demand versus your absolute capacity,
Right,
that tells you it right there. If you look at your resourcing, that tells you it right there. The equipment is a little more subtle and a little more challenging to ferret out, but you can definitely do that.
So this sounds aligned with the Kinefin's model.
Not familiar.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I'll share with you because he divided into 5 regions, and there is a region in the middle that's called the chaos system. But why don't I share with you what I have, and maybe we can discuss offline.
Awesome.
It's very,
Awesome. I'd
very
appreciate it.
like one-to-one aligned with what you have described, and I would love to touch base with you on that.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you, Baha.
Thank you.
Brad, I'm curious about the constraint have to do with staffing and your thoughts about, I mean, put it in the chat, but that a lot of the hospitals I've been in focus on FTE counts
Yes.
and doesn't really take into account the mix of roles. I mean, it kind of speaks to your constraint issue that you were talking about. I'm curious your thoughts about that approach to staffing, and then also your thoughts about, I mean, I've always thought that if, and I don't know if it plays out in actuality, in reality versus in my theory in my head, but that I've always thought that if you overstaffed on maybe some of the lower technical roles, you could, even if they're not ultimately totally productive, that would allow your flow of the higher skilled roles to be able to be maximally productive and have less of them doing roles that are effectively wasting their intellectual capital. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, if that's well facilitated, well designed, and there's role clarity in that regard, so that you're not just adding resources, that becomes relatively powerful. The more you can offset that. You know, the key thing on staffing, and the biggest challenge that I face with clients in doing this work, is they have productivity numbers they're looking for, right? And to a certain extent, I've done a lot of work in systems, 24 hospital systems alike. They have a standard and it's almost gospel, you're going to hit this standard. Well, there's a big difference in staffing for reliability and staffing for productivity. And in the last facility we did this work in, those inpatients that were being served in the ED, servicing those patients 24/7 required 80 nurses. That's a big one to get a client to swallow. Now, some of those were drawn from inpatient units, but some of those were additional positions. There was a productivity hit early on, but as you were able to discharge your obs patients directly from there without moving them up to an observation unit, accommodate surgical patients and creating capacity in surgical, the net effect was a productivity gain. But it took some time to get there. There was an up, and then it kind of normalized, and that bubble, if you will, was to the tune of about $450,000. And that's not easy to get the executive team to swallow without them understanding the concept of staffing for reliability versus staffing for productivity. The following year, a year after we finished doing that work, they had a corporate mandated reduction in force, which impacted that area. And we watched the numbers. We had gotten them to a weight-free state in the ED, gotten them weight-free. And then we watched the numbers just go right back. Almost, they didn't get as bad as they were, but almost right back to where they were before. So that's a really challenging aspect of this work.
Yeah.
And that's why creating the education and the leadership alignment early on is so critical. Same with shifting those ED docs, moving them forward. The first time we told them, you're 3 hours behind the curve, you're inflecting all this weight into your system by doing that, they came in 3 hours earlier and they were like, hey, we don't have enough to keep us busy here. The numbers got better though. They got substantially better. And they said, yeah, we don't have enough to keep us busy here. We're going back to the old way. And the numbers got worse. You know, it just.
Yeah. And I imagine costs got worse too, as people had to do overtime, especially reduction in force. So we cut FTE, and then our costs go through the roof, but FTE looks good. So, you know, somehow we hit those numbers as if that's a good thing, but we don't look at the big picture. So it's that inability to look at from a systems view.
Yeah.
You're focused on this one measure, and then you miss out on the big picture, and you're sinking your ship. Yeah, I think that's often what happens.
Well,
So
you know,
classic.
a reduction in force is always going to involve trade-off, because there is no way when you do a reduction in force that you're going to be at the same service levels that you were previously.
Right.
So your service levels erode, your patient satisfaction erodes, and I would say if you put yourself in a position where you've got 5 nurses doing the work of 10, your quality, safety, and reliability is going to go out the window too because of errors of omission.
Brad, when I go
Excellent.
through all these cities and I see these huge billboards, my wait time at X hospital is 2 minutes. I bet that's where you worked.
Some of them are. Some
Thanks,
of our
Brad, this has been Brad. This has been outstanding. I do want to go ahead and wrap us up because we've got 3 minutes to time, and I want people to be able to have a bit of time to transition for those who have a 9 o'clock or Pacific Coast time, 9 o'clock. So thank you so very much. This has been wonderful. I've learned a lot. I've really enjoyed you sharing. I think we've got some people in the pipeline for next time as possible ideas. So if you are interested in sharing some of your work, anyone, let me know and I'll put you on a future call. We try to meet every 6 weeks, roughly, give or take. Sometimes it's in the afternoon, sometimes it's in the morning. This time seems to work for many people, so I might shift it to this particular time for the future. So anyway, thank you so very much. This has been great. I loved getting to know all of you and met some new people as well. So thank you and have a wonderful day. We'll be in touch. I will send the recording out to everyone through email. Take care.
Thanks
so
so
much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.